want to talk about something that really freaked me out and was very eye-opening in the Looney Tune bin. There was a patient, and he kept just pacing and doing circles and doing circles and doing circles. And one of the other patients there told me, he was like, "Do you know what he's doing?" I was like, "No." We called him Oscar because he would carry around the trash can and do circles with it. And I was like, "No." And he goes, "Where do you think they first start testing these antipsychotic drugs at?" And I'm like, I'm not sure, because we see all these quote studies. He said, and he was in prison for years. He says, where they first start testing all these antipsychotic drugs is on the inmates. And I was like, what? He goes, oh yeah, when they first come out with these drugs, the first patients that they will start testing it on is the inmates. And I haven't fully done my research on that, but I have no doubt that what he was saying was accurate because he was very articulate. He was extremely intelligent. He really taught himself when he was in prison about all kinds of things. And he saw this. And he's like, yeah, it's basically like they'll fry the inmate's brain and then they'll find out if these drugs are really harmful and then they'll start doing their studies. And if you ever watch Stephen Molyneux, and I have him on one of my like list, and my favorite episode that he had was Mental Illness is Not a Disease. And he goes into all the financial incentives behind mental illness and making people feel like they're sick. We weren't meant to be in this kind of environment. Like, all the stuff that we have nowadays, like, this was never intended by God. This isn't natural, So it's like, really, are people just getting sick, or is our environment sick? It's way more to do with our environment, because I was also researching in other cultures. Like, people with bipolar, like, they call them shaman, and they're spiritual, like, leaders and stuff. I think where we really get ourselves into trouble being bipolar is we have access to, like, cars and bank accounts, and everything's so fast and exciting because mania will feed into itself. Like, when you start, like, you have less and less and less of a desire to sleep. I remember feeling like, how children are excited about everything. And then it would feed into itself, because then I would stay up longer and longer. And it would feed into itself. And the more I wasn't sleeping, the more energy internally I was having. But what freaked me out that I was doing also, because, yeah, my episodes were fully documented because I had a YouTube channel at the time, and I really released some inner anger that I had about things, but to me, it was extremely therapeutic. I'm not saying it was the best thing to do. It's what got me really into trouble, not just because I was, quote, crazy. It's because I was really doing some research and stumbled upon some very bad things that are happening in South Carolina. This is Trey Gowdy Nation. How I learned the law was watching Trey Gowdy in the House and Senate with Jason Chavetz. So when people want to talk about all these conspiracy theories, like I was saying in my last video, and I'll get lost in a thought and then I'll realize I cut myself short. It was a term coined by the CIA when they were conspiring to dismiss what people were coming up with. Like the National Enquirer, that used to be a legitimate news outlet until it was bought, and to make the National Enquirer a joke, that's when they started coming out with all this weird stuff. But when the National Enquirer first came out, it was a legitimate site like Breitbart and stuff, where they're coming out with knowledgeable things. But I was so freaked out by that when he's like, yeah, they're like, they'll go fry the inmates' brains and then they'll go test it on actual people. And I was like, oh my, which I have no doubt. Go study the privatized prison systems. That's some corrupt stuff. We have a 700% increase in the incarcerated since the 1970s. And how it works is, okay, so when they're privatized, say the federal government will give $80 a day per person. And of course, they try to skim it to where, like, the food is the cheapest, nastiest stuff. And a lot of mental health is very dependent on the food that you eat. Like, I notice a huge difference. I'm not somebody that can eat junk food. Yeah, I'll love to eat junk food, but I can tell how it messes with my brain. And all they give inmates is stuff that is like starch, junk. It's the grossest stuff ever. If you've ever been locked up, luckily I only had, at my most, I stayed in jail for $30 for contempt of court. And talk about learning a lot. And something that I was also looking into, because we had a 17% increase in the kids that were getting into the foster care system. There's a news outlet, the State and Post. They wrote an article that's called Warehouse for Children, and it talks about all these group homes and how these end up being, these are our future prisoners. 70% of the prisoners came from the foster care system, and they came from group homes. And what girls would tell me in jail, they're like, yeah, being in jail is not really a big deal to us because it's not much different than the group homes. Like, that's how bad they were. And this was like far more than one testimony. And hearing, like, I know that some people are foster parents because they genuinely care and they have the heart for it. Others are in it for the money. Even though it's not much money, they can still make it to where the child is just a small fraction, and then they can get a bunch of them. Read the Nancy Schaefer report, and you'll be horrified of Big Pharma and what is actually going on. And like I said, I worked in the medical field over 10 years. When I'm talking about being diagnosed with everything under the sun, every time you can stamp a diagnosis on somebody, you get more money from like Medicare and Medicaid. They pay more money for the more diagnosis. So that's going on with adults, but also with children. They'll stamp them with a bunch of diagnoses, give them all these antipsychotic drugs that have been proven to cause permanent brain damage. There was a case study of twins, and the one was fed antipsychotics throughout his life, and the other one wasn't. He became a schizophrenic later in life, and they're like, was this genetic? Because they were identical twins. They're like, was this genetic? Or giving him these antipsychotic drugs when he was younger caused it? Because it's been proven to cause damage to your gray matter. And it's like, while we're in mania, our frontal lobes might shut off, where it's like our higher functioning thinking as far as being in control of our emotions and what we're doing, but the other parts of brain are on fire, So when I said I felt like my brain fully engaged, that's when I started really doing research into these things. And I would post it, and then I would go send it to the whole our house and Senate and everything about the bullshit that I was seeing here in Greenville with the House of Representatives that I could financially prove, But sorry, I'll get off on another subject. I'm bad about focusing. They said I had bipolar plus, like bipolar plus ADHD, which I can't deny it anymore. I'm like, yeah, I do. And then I do research on who else has bipolar because it's become a punchline in a joke. It's like, what are you, bipolar? And it's like, well, do you like fucking movies? Most of them came out of a bipolar brain. Like I said, Abraham, Teddy Roosevelt. There's so many famous writers, Emily Dickinson. Like all of them, you read through it and you're like, yeah, that's bipolar. That's, you really elevated and then you can crash. I'm lucky in the sense that I always had a hypomanic brain and I never crashed into depression until I was diagnosed, because I saw what my brother went through and I was completely terrified. But seeing how much Big Pharma, like I said, watch Stephen Molyneux, and mental illness is not a disease, and you will see what is going on with the federal government and why, making people believe that it's just their, quote, mental illness, and it's not our environment and the toxicity that is going on all around us. But those are just a few of my thoughts, so I try to keep it a little bit shorter. I used to go on long rants. Boy, did they feel good, but when I watched them looking back, I'm like, oh my god, I was so manic. But you guys have a blessed evening. Thank you.